right, well, it's time for another vagabond journey. So for about the next week, I'm going to be exploring some areas in Montana that I really haven't really checked out and been to before. So I'm around Fort Peck Lake in northeastern Montana, and it's just this beautiful artificial reservoir that covers about 130 miles up and down the stretch of it, and it just has a huge amount of shoreline. And all around Fort Peck Lake is a national wildlife refuge. And in the refuge, there are all these outcrops that have some just amazing concentrations of dinosaur fossils. Like some of the most Tyrannosaurus fossils ever discovered have been in these outcrops around Fort Peck Lake. So I'm super stoked to spend at least a couple days exploring this area and wandering its shores and filming the lake and filming the outcrops and hopefully finding some BLM land where I can fly my drone, since on the wildlife refuge I unfortunately can't. So there'll be some really cool stuff out here, and come join me on this new journey.
Fort Peck Lake, the fifth largest artificially constructed lake in the United States, is regardless a beautiful wonder surrounded by some of the richest dinosaur fossil-bearing habitat on our planet. Because the days are getting shorter, I arrived at the lake late in the day, so I found a place to camp and enjoyed the immense beauty of the golden hour light until the sun disappeared. The next morning, I once again gazed in awe at the golden light that the sun offers when low on the horizon, and set off to explore the strange meeting of badlands and lake that is the Fort Peck area. Working my way to the lake, the wind was strong enough to create waves on the shore, giving this strange impression that I was back at the ocean, despite being over 1,000 miles from the Pacific.
It's very, very strange to be at such a large lake on such a windy day that you can just hear the choppiness of these waves and can't see into the horizon where the lake extends into. It almost feels like I'm back at the ocean for a time. It's a very strange experience because obviously I'm many, many hundreds of miles away from the coast, yet there's this giant water body generating these waves and listening to it. Really, really interesting experience.
Fort Peck Lake is an odd place that inspired mixed reactions from me. The lake was created by the damming of the Missouri River, a river that for many hundreds of years was central to much of the life on the Great Plains. With the dams in place, a great deal of the original ecology of the Missouri has been lost, and what remains is a ghost of its former self. That Lewis and Clark used the Missouri, the lifeblood of the plains, to explore the West seems fitting. After their expedition, the West and its occupants would never be the same. Despite the strange feeling that I felt when I first visited the reservoir shores, in the plains habitats around it held tremendous beauty that I had a great time exploring. There's great wonder to be found where the lush meets the arid. After exploring those small scenes of beauty, I decided that it was time to visit a very different part of the lake, noted by Lewis and Clark as having the first pines they'd seen in many hundreds of miles.
So I'm currently at a place by Fort Peck Lake that they call the Pines, and as you can see there's lots and lots of juniper trees throughout here. So apparently when Lewis and Clark went up the Missouri River before it was dammed up to create Fort Peck Lake, this area were basically the first actual pine trees that they'd seen in hundreds and hundreds of miles, and it's nice and a relief to see them after 50, 60 miles. So I can only imagine with that length of time and how vast a lot of the plains are, must have been a relief to see such a different kind of world.
In many ways, the trees help brighten me in my journeys, giving many fond memories of the ponderosa and juniper of my childhood. Using the last of the daylight, I found land where I can fly my drone and explored the plains from the skies.
Well, this was completely unexpected. I saw a sign for the Bear Paw Battlefield, and since I really enjoy kind of wandering some of these old battlefields and feeling the history of the place, I looked up what the Bear Paw Battlefield was, and this is the place where Chief Joseph was captured with the other Nez Perce after a chase through several states that lasted for 1,200 miles when Chief Joseph and the other Nez Perce had tried to cross the Canadian border for sanctuary. So it's really just kind of an incredible journey that they managed to make it that far with the US military on their tail, came out victorious in several conflicts on the way, fought back the soldiers, and unfortunately fell short of just 40 miles from the border. And this is where they were captured and those particular dreams had ended. So I'm going to go wander the trail and learn a little bit about those events and what precisely they went through to try to find their way to freedom.
The Bear Paw Battlefield was a place where dreams of freedom by a group of Nez Perce came to a violent end. In June 1877, Chief Joseph and other chiefs led several bands of Nez Perce on an epic attempt to gain freedom from a forced relocation into an Idaho reservation from their homeland in northeastern Oregon. In total, evading capture through navigation and combat, they covered 1,200 miles across Oregon, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. Exhausted and camping in the bitter cold by the Bear Paw Mountains, 40 miles from the Canadian border, they thought that they had outrun their pursuers and could rest a day. But, unknown to them, a separate group of soldiers had formed and staged a surprise attack on the camp. After several days of fierce fighting, including active shelling of Nez Perce children and their families, Chief Joseph formally surrendered, being promised the return of the homeland they were torn from. That promise was never kept.